أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على خير المرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم سبحانك اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. So welcome back. We're still in the midst of the sections that deal with marriage and divorce, as I mentioned before, the beginning of the subjects of mu'amalat. And last time we were talking about the situations of a person marrying and divorcing when he's in an illness from which he might be expected to die. And now we move beyond that into reasons to dissolve a marriage straight away, basically, or reasons to dissolve a marriage if they develop later. And this refers to physical conditions and mental conditions and psychological conditions, sort of illnesses, as it were, or things that people might be put off by. So not everything that's off-putting is the grounds for dissolution of a marriage, but these ones he mentions are. So he says here, وَتُرَدُّ الْمَرْأَةُ مِنَ الْجُنُونِ وَالْجِذَامِ. All of this is based, by the way, on a hadith of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he basically said that if somebody is sick, they should not be put together with somebody who is well. They should not be sort of forced together. And marriage, of course, is the way where people are put together the most. لا يريد ممرض على مصح. That's the basic hadith of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Because there are conditions which makes it hard for people to be together when the other person has those things. When it comes to marriage, this is not referring to all types of mumrid, all types of people who are sick, but specifically, because when it comes to illnesses in the deen, they're divided up into two types. There's one type which is forbidden for the prophets, and that's the off-putting type, or the ones that make people run away because they are maybe contagious, or they may make somebody look so horrible that you couldn't even contemplate being near them. And that's called munaffir. And then there are just generally illnesses like flu and common colds and things like that. The ones that the Messenger of Allah was referring to are the previous one, the munaffir, especially when they have a chance of contagion, like certain types of leprosy that he mentions here and other things of that nature. So those particular ones that are contagious in that way, and there are specific ones that are mentioned here, but it would refer to other ones of that nature that would prevent intimacy. They are grounds for divorce. If you marry someone and you discover that they have a condition like this, then you have the choice, whether just to accept it and deal with it if you want to, or say, no, I don't want to be married to him or her anymore. So obviously, a man has the choice anyway of talaq to be able to get out of that situation, but there are further consequences in terms of financial on a man if he gives a talaq. Whereas in this particular case, those financial implications do not affect him when it's dissolved on these grounds. So the majority of these ones are of three types. They are insanity, or being mad. Then they are these types of illnesses that I mentioned that are contagious and off-putting in the extreme, or people associate them with something horrible like leprosy or whatever, or they are things that relate to the sexual organs, which is one of the main purposes of marriage, men and women becoming together sexually. So he mentions here, وَتُرَدُّ الْمَرْأَةُ, a woman, the marriage, she may be cast back, or the marriage to her may be revoked or dissolved. Min al-junun, if she has what's called junun. By the way, it says here a woman, but he doesn't go into the details about the men, but the junun is for both men and women, being mad. And this applies even if she's basically sane 90% of the time, then once a month or once every couple of months, she has a bout. Because why do you think the reason for that is? Why should this be grounds for a marriage being dissolved? Have you ever met somebody who is mad?
Many times.
Yes. Do you know when you get into very intimate settings with people who are mad, they sometimes lash out at the people who are closest to them. So it can be very, very scary, basically. So that's the main reason for that, because if you're forced to live with somebody who's mad, you're putting yourself at risk, basically. Even if that madness is only once in a while, because you'll be at risk at that once in a while. This does not apply to what was also classified as madness, but it's not the same thing, is like fits, where somebody has a fit where they sort of become like this, and then suddenly they're unconscious for a while. That's not grounds for divorce, because that has no danger attached to it. The danger is only to the person who is suffering from that. This is the type of madness where you rearrange the world to something different. That's what we're talking about here. And then we have whether it's before. So if the madness predates the marriage, then that's definitively grounds, no matter how serious or not. And with this particular one, with madness, it also counts if it comes after the marriage, because of the danger attached to it. Unless the person knows about this situation and decides to remain with them anyway, which is basically giving his consent to that particular condition that he or she will be prepared to live with them. So min al-junun wal-judham wal-baras. These are two terms that are often translated as leprosy, but there are two different types of it. One is where the manifestations are physical, such as stunted limbs or limbs dropping off or sores and things like that, which is called judham. And the other one is baras, which has mainly to do with the skin becoming whitened, especially in large patches of skin becoming white across the body. Now, obviously, the first one I mentioned is worse because it's considered to be contagious, whereas the first one may not be contagious, but they were both grounds for somebody to leave them. Because, that particular thing is something that you see it and you think that it must be dangerous for you when it comes to baras. And somebody will have married them and you didn't expect them to have this thing, which, especially in those times, had a particular thing attached to it, somebody being a leper. Both for the male and the female. And again, if this develops before marriage, it doesn't matter if it's only a tiny patch. If it develops after the marriage has already taken place, then it has to be serious with respect to the whiteness for it to be grounds for divorce, but not with regards to the other one because it's contagious. And the final one he mentions here is wada'il faraj, and that's defects relating to the sexual organs. And with respect to women, that means anything which blocks her vaginal passage, basically. It makes sexual intercourse impossible. There were external growths. They have different Arabic names, qarn and afal and various things, which refer to whether it's a protuberance of skin that grows on the outside that makes it impossible, or whether it's simply that her vagina has grown so small that it makes sexual intercourse impossible. In some African countries, when they do the circumcision, that actually leads to that. Or where there is swelling between the anus and the vagina, which also stops the region being open enough for the possibility of sexual intercourse. But another one that's not actually relating to the physical possibility is when there's a very repugnant smell that emanates from there. Now, some of these things can be treated. When there is a possibility of treatment, and that's determined by the doctors, then that is not grounds. Because then the qadi will say, look, okay, you have such and such a time to get treatment and to resolve this condition. If you don't do it in this period of time, and obviously he would take into account the length of time that's needed for such a thing to be resolved, then that would be the case. But generally speaking, especially at that time, most of these things were not really treatable or not very easily treatable. So they were grounds because it meant that one of the purposes of marriage was sexual enjoyment of each other, and that was impossible. So that was the grounds for a particular. When it comes to men, the ones that they mention are firstly castration. So if a man has lost both his testicles or one of his testicles, or a testicle and part of his penis, or had all of it removed, all of these things are grounds for her to divorce him. or to insist on a divorce. And similarly, another one is when he has such a small member that it's impossible for the sexual act to take place, which is called inna, or being innin. And there's another one he mentions here, which is called mu'tarid. Before there was one other one with relation to the women that was mentioned, and that was when the urinal passage and the vaginal passage form the same passage, which was also considered to be grounds. And there's one that refers to both, is that when they are engaged in the actual sexual intercourse, have a tendency to urinate or defecate, which some people suffer from. That's grounds also for divorce. These are the various different types of things they talk about. So they can be quite graphic in some of these ones, but it goes into the details. There's one here that he talks about, which is impotency now for men. When a man does not have the capacity to maintain an erection for long enough to complete the sexual act. Now, this can happen by reason of old age. If it happens by reason of old age and there's no hope of it getting better, then this ruling I'm going to mention does not apply. Basically, that's grounds for her to demand a divorce, because especially if she is somebody who has a need for sexual intimacy or sexual relations. But this one here is if it happens to a younger man and the doctors determine that there might be some hope of the situation rectifying itself, because it's very often psychological. But sometimes it can be physical as well. So they give a certain period of time. So here he mentions, وَيُؤَخَّرُ الْمُعْتَرِضُ سَنَةً. If somebody is suffering from this, the wife does not automatically get a divorce from him. He is given, basically what she does is she goes to the qadi. In all of these things, where these rulings have periods of time, it's the qadi who starts that period of time. So if she has a husband who cannot get an erection or maintain an erection, and she's getting frustrated about this, she's waited a while and nothing's happened, then she goes to the qadi. The first thing the qadi does is he looks to the person. If the person is sick with another ailment that potentially has the side effect of this being the case, of him losing his potency as a result of that illness, then the qadi says, well, just wait for him to recover from this illness, if it's obviously an illness that can be recovered from. And then if it's still happening after he's recovered from that illness, then we'll start the year. If the guy is perfectly healthy in every other way, apart from the fact that he cannot get an erection or maintain an erection, and in those days they didn't have sort of like these treatments like Viagra and things like this. So basically, in those situations, the qadi says, right, you have a year to seek out treatment or to resolve whatever psychological issues you have or whatever it is. And if at the end of that year you have not resolved it, then basically he will grant her a divorce. So that's this particular instance. So I said it has to be treatable. So if it's because of old age or something like that, then this would not apply. Now, in the course of this year, she can still ask for a divorce for other reasons. For example, if she is somebody who has a need of regular sexual intercourse, and she fears that she'll commit zina if, she doesn't have sexual relations with her husband, then the qadi will look at that and then see if that's a real thing, and then he might grant her a divorce before this period is up, potentially, because that lack of sexual intercourse is considered to be the same as a lack of nafaqah, of maintenance, which is grounds for asking for divorce, because it's considered a form of abuse. No, this is divorce. I mean, because this one can happen. This is not exactly the same as the other ones, because in all of these other cases, if the husband or the wife has this condition and the other person disregards it by being intimate with him or her, then that's considered to be an acceptance of that thing, and it's no longer grounds for dissolvement. But in this case, obviously, if he's unable to get an erection, they're going to be trying regularly. It's not as if they're keeping away from each other. So she can demand this at any point. It could be a year of trying and she's not being successful. Then she could say, all right, no, this is not working for me. So it's a little bit different. and it will lead to a divorce in this particular case. It's not the same as the other ones which have we let's just go through actually, because we didn't mention the consequences from the other ones. I'll go back a bit. So he says here, فَإِن دَخَلَ بِهَا, this was referring to the defects. There are absolute defects that are not temporary ones, like this lack of ability to direction. He says, if the woman has any of these defects that we mentioned before, and the husband has sexual intercourse with her, and pays her sadaq. So this is, he didn't realize, basically. So he goes in, he has sexual intercourse with her, and then he notices afterwards, oh my gosh, is that leprosy I see? Or, you know, hey, what's this bout of madness that's suddenly come over you? Or whatever it might be. So he has sexual intercourse with her, and then he pays her the dowry that he agreed. And then, because in the instance of the other ones, it's dissolved without him having to pay her anything, if it's resolved before he had sexual intercourse with her. But if he had, this is when the defect is hers. But if he has sexual intercourse with her, that brings in sadaq. Sadaq is something that has to be paid once a woman has given herself sexually in marriage. There's no way of getting around that. Even if the marriage itself was not correct in the way that it was done, still she has to get that. So this, you know, in this sense, you think, well, that's a bit unfair because she had this defect and he would not have gone through with the marriage and had consummated it if he knew about it. So why is he still having to pay? Isn't that a bit unfair? So he answers that here. He says here, if he didn't know and he pays her sadaq, what happens is that, well, he has to pay her sadaq, and then he goes to her father, if her father was the one who married her to him, and says, you owe me. So he says here, وَرَجَعَ بِهِ عَلَى أَبِيهَا, he recovers it or claims it back from her father. So he gives her the promised sadaq, and then he goes to the dad and says, look, you didn't tell me about this. You married her to me. You owe me all of this. And it becomes a debt on him that he has to pay back the husband. وَكَذَلِكَ إِنْ زَوَّجَهَا أَخُوهَا. And similarly, the same applies if her brother marries her to him, or her grandfather, or somebody very, very close. Yeah? But not if somebody is further away. So if her brother is her wali, then he can go to the brother and say, you owe me. Or her grandfather, or somebody of that closeness. But anything further away than that, no. So he says here, وَإِنْ زَوَّجَهَا وَلِيٌّ لَيْسَ بِقَرِيبٍ. If a guardian or her wali is somebody who is not closely related to her, and he is the one who marries her to him, فَلَا شَيْءَ عَلَيْهِ إِلَّا, so he does not have to pay anything at all. Well, لَا شَيْءَ عَلَيْهِ is referring to the wali. The wali, the guardian, does not have to pay him anything. In other words, he can't claim back from him. وَلَا يَكُونُ لَهَا إِلَّا رُبْعُ دِينَارٍ. And she doesn't get anything except for a quarter dinar. Because basically the responsibility is now on her when she is the one who's being married by somebody who doesn't know her intimately or closely. Because how would they be expected to know? So the responsibility is now devolved to her. So basically, even if she was promised 100 dinars, and even though he had sexual intercourse with her, she only gets what's the minimum dowry allowed, which is a quarter dinar. Or 3 dirhams in the places that use dirhams rather than dinars. So the minimum dowry. Because you have to get something when you've given yourself sexually in a marriage. So going back to the mu'tarid, the person who is unable to maintain an erection, yu'akharu al-mu'tarid sana, he is given a month's grace, a year's grace period. He's allowed to wait for a year by the qadi. فَإِنْ وَطَأَ, if he has sexual intercourse with her in that period, then they're back together. no issues. If he claims that he's done and she says he hasn't, then his word is accepted so long as he swears an oath. It's a big thing. It wasn't like, you would just randomly in the street, oh, swear that. No, they would bring you before people and witnesses and the qadi into a place where there's a lot of haiba, like a mosque or a courthouse or somewhere else, the king's palace or whatever it is. And you would be asked to swear your oath in that place, but people are scared to lie because it's so public or because of they're in the house of Allah, whatever it might be. And then the person's asked to swear an oath. If he refuses to swear an oath, then she swears an oath that he didn't sleep with her, and that's it. So he says here, illa, if he does not get together with her sexually in that year, does not have intercourse with her full sexual intercourse with her in that year, furriqa baynahuma, they are separated. Usually means with a divorce. The qadi does this. Often the way this is done is he first says to the husband, divorce her. And then if the husband refuses, then he says, okay, I'll divorce her over your head. So basically to keep things nice so that you're not taking away somebody's right fully from them, you give them the option of doing it first. And then the qadi takes it away, says, all right, fine. In sha'at, if she still wants to be divorced from him. So it's not automatic. She might have asked for this year, and then even though he hasn't had sexual intercourse with her in the course of that year, she might have realized she still enjoys living with him. And so when the qadi says at the end of the year, all right, okay, I can give you your divorce now, she'll say, no, it's all right, I'll stick it out. Even though, when these years or these time periods are given to a married couple, that doesn't, absolve the husband of the things that a marriage requires of him. He still has to provide for her in that time and all those other things. It's important to realize that. Because he's on probation doesn't mean that he ceases to be a husband. So that's the end of that particular section. If there's any questions on that before we move on. So we go into the next one, which is called mafqood. When a husband is missing, basically. So obviously in the past, people would go on journeys. Sometimes these journeys would take them a long way away. And it might not always be easy to know where that person is. So generally what would happen is he might have told his wife, I'll be back in 6 months' time or a year's time. And so that time passed, and then well, where is he? And then she would maybe wonder for a bit longer, and then she'd think, oh, something might have happened to him. So what she would do then is go to the qadi. And the qadi would then basically send out to the place that he was last known to be. He would send a messenger there to the qadi of that local area or the leader of that local area, say, look, can you do an investigation for us? And, if this costs money, for example, the money might be taken from the wife or the money that the husband left to pay for this. And so they would conduct an investigation, trying to find out where his last movements were, where he was last seen, and so on and so on. If they still are unable to find where he is, then the news comes back to the qadi and he starts a 4-year period, basically, of time. Because he's missing. This does not apply, by the way, if the person went to fight a battle and then lots of Muslims were killed in the battle and then the guy doesn't come back from the battle. Then the assumption is he was killed. You don't give the 4 years in that case. Or he's gone on a ship and that ship has sunk and then the guy doesn't come back after quite a long period of time, where you'd expect if somebody had survived, he would still have a chance. I mean, I suppose it's possible he was Robinson Crusoe or something, but I mean, generally speaking, it doesn't apply in those sorts of cases where there's clearly been an event, or like he went to a place where there was plague or whatever it is. But if he generally just got lost, and this is within the lands of the Muslims, if it's outside the lands of the Muslims, you can't even do the stage of investigation because then basically that's when you have the 4 years. Basically, there doesn't seem to be any particular reason why he's disappeared. Something might have happened. He might have been killed by bandits, but nobody knows. In those cases, that you have this 4-year period. So he says, وَالْمَفْقُودُ يُضْرَبُ لَهُ أَجَلُ أَرْبَعَ سِنِينَ. The person who is presumed missing or is missing, and obviously when the wife comes to the qadi, she has to be able to prove that he's missing. You know, he's not going to start this wasting the time of the qadi when he's actually just hiding in the shed. And she has to be able to prove that they're actually still married. Otherwise, and they did get married in the first place in order to start all these proceedings, because otherwise it will be a waste of official time. So he's given a period of time of 4 years from the day tarfa'u dhalika, from the day she started the motion or she raised the matter with the qadi. It should be the qadi, but if there's no qadi in the place that you are, then you can do whoever's like a representative of the qadi, even if it's like the emir of that locale. So someplace, not everywhere had qadis. The number one person who should do this is the qadi beyond anybody. But if a place simply had like a zakat collector or a clan leader or something like that, then that person would be able to start these proceedings. من يوم ترفع ذلك وينتهي الكشف عنه, and the search for him has ended. So actually, the 4 years starts from the day the search ends, not from the day she raises it, but he has them both together. Once the 4 years is done, she doesn't have to go back to the qadi and get an official ruling from him, saying the 4 years is done. She knows when the day starts, and then the moment the 4 years ends, this is what happens. ثم تعتد كعدة الميت. Then she starts an iddah period at the end of the 4 years, like the iddah of a widow. The iddah of a widow, which is 4 months and 10 days. So basically the presumption is that he's dead. What happens if he's not dead? Well, that's a separate issue here.
I was in jail.
So I mean, there's a number of issues here. If he turns up after her iddah and she has remarried and consummated the marriage with somebody else, then that's too late for him. If he turns up before she has consummated the marriage, then there's like a gray area while she's married somebody. There's a difference of opinion. But if he turns up while she has not yet got married, even though the iddah ended it, he basically has most right to get back together with her. So she's no longer married to him. Well, if it's within the iddah, no, they get back together. But if it's after, then he has more right than anybody else to her remarriage in a sense. If it turns out he's dead, then it depends when he died. If he died within that 4 year period and within her iddah, then she would inherit from him. If it turns out that he died after the iddah had ended, but he's dead, they learn that he's dead, but he died later, then she wouldn't inherit anything from him. So it's important to realize those things as well. But he says here, then she waits out an iddah like the iddah of a widow. Then she can remarry if she wants to. وَلَا يُورَثُ مَالُهُ. As for his estate, this guy may have been a rich person. So he may have left a lot of money and a lot of property and a lot of other things. So what happens with all of that property? He's not been declared dead, even though she's been allowed to divorce him because of her own needs. He's not been given a declaration of being dead. So what happens to his estate? He says here, nobody can inherit from the wealth that he leaves behind. حتى يأتي عليه من الزمان ما لا يعيش إلى مثله, until enough time has passed that nobody could be expected to still be alive. And they say you give him like until would have reached the age of 80. That would be enough time to suspect that he's not coming back. So basically his wealth is sort of put on pause. Because once she's gone from him as well, she can no longer get nafaqah from his wealth either. So nobody can touch his wealth. The qadi basically puts it on pause. No, and then it remains on pause until that period of time passes, and then his heirs would then inherit from him. So it's this. There's also the instance, this only applies, this 4 year period, if she left enough nafaqah, enough maintenance for the wife to actually still be looked after for those 4 years. If he didn't, basically he left her with nothing, then she can go to the Qadi straight away and say, look, I'm not getting my nafaqah from my husband. And that's grounds for divorce. And then he would divorce her immediately. Or, if she's somebody who is very hot-blooded and has sexual needs, she can use the same thing. She can say, look, I can't wait 4 years. That's a bit unreasonable. So it's not always 4 years, but this is 4 years in the case of somebody who doesn't have that level of need and that she's been left with enough money to look after hers. ولا تخطب المرأة في عدتها. We mentioned this, I think, a couple of weeks ago. When a woman is in her iddah, there are certain rules that are attached to her being in iddah. One of the main ones, well, the main one obviously is she's not allowed to marry in her iddah. But something that's similar to that is she's not allowed to get betrothed in her iddah. Nobody is allowed to come to her and ask her to marry them in her iddah. So this is a direct asking of marriage. I would like to marry you. Will you please marry me? Something like that. That's not allowed in her iddah. But what is allowed is less than that. So to send a message to her or to her guardian, I really like her. Or send a gift, except if the gifts in that particular culture are a binding promise of marriage. But if they're not, then it's something that is a take it or leave it, in terms of a woman can take lots and lots of gifts from her husband and nothing at the end of the day is expected to necessarily have to result. Then she could do that. Or it could even say things like, I love you, or, I've got some good news for you, or anything of that nature. So basically, so long as it's an indirect allusion, but as soon as you say, we can get married, or I would like to marry you, that's forbidden. So he says here, وَلَا بَأْسَ بِالتَّعْرِيض, there's no harm in making allusions, بِالْقَوْلِ الْمَعْرُوفِ, with words, saying nice things to her. But he didn't mention gifts, but they do often include gifts, as I said. وَمَنْ نَكَحَ, this is something else we also mentioned. So basically, if a man who has wives remarries or marries again, we mentioned that there's something that's obligatory for a man who has more than one wife, and that is that he give each wife an equal amount of time. But when a man marries a new wife, and he already has wives, the new wife is given a certain number of free days, basically, for her alone, which is outside of the shared time that has to be shared with all the other wives. And this amount of free time depends on whether the woman has been married before or not. If she has not been married before, what's called a bikr, then she is given 7 days, a longer time, because being married is a culture shock to her. She's come from a completely different sort of environment, and she's given more time in order to get used to that and to get used to the person who she's now going to be spending her life with. This is a totally new form of experience to her. So she's given 7 days. If a woman has been married before, a thayyib, then she's given only 3 days, because again, she needs the free time for the celebration of being married, but she's not considered to need that same level of time to get used to the new type of situation. So that's the reasoning behind it. If a man marries 2 women on the same day, which has happened on occasion, then he has to give them both this time, but he gives the one he married first the time first, and then the one he married second the time after that. So that's the way they get around that. They don't have to share the time. He doesn't have to take them both on the same honeymoon. This is something else that's connected to something we talked about before. We talked about the ayats that talk about the women that are forbidden to you because of your relationship to them, by your family relationship with them. And we also mentioned as part of that you're not allowed to marry 2 sisters at the same time. So in connection with this, he comes here, he says, وَلَا يَجْمَعُ بَيْنَ الْأُخْتَيْنِ فِي مِلْكِ الْيَمِينِ فِي الْوَطَأِ. Just as you're not allowed to be married to 2 women at the same time, because the word nikah in Arabic has a technical meaning, which is the marriage contract, and a linguistic meaning, which is sexual intercourse, it applies to both. So he says here, if you own two sisters, they're both slave women, you bought two women who share the same parents, you're not allowed to have sexual intercourse with both of them. You can only have sexual intercourse with one of them, even though when you own a person, you have the right through ownership of sexual intercourse with them, a man with a slave woman. That's not the case when you own two sisters. So if you have two sisters that you own, you have to, and you want to have sexual intercourse with one of them, you cannot have sexual intercourse with the other, as he mentions here. So he says here, فَإِنْ شَاءَ, so if he has had sexual intercourse with one of them, and he wants to have sexual intercourse with the other one, he says here, if he wants to have sexual intercourse with the other, فَلْيُحَرِّمْ عَلَيْهِ فَرْجَ الْأُولَى, he must make the first one haram for himself. So he mentions some of the ways you can do this. You know, he makes her haram by herself when he sold her and she's now the property of somebody else. So he says, bibay'in. At the moment he sells her, she's no longer his own property, he can't have sexual intercourse with her. Or he says, kitaba, when he gives her, makes a contract with her that she can pay for her own freedom. She can pay in installments to free herself. She now becomes semi-free, and he's not allowed to have sexual intercourse with any woman who is not fully his slave. So that's another thing that makes her haram for himself. Or he says here, or he frees her, or shibhihi, or other things like that, which includes partial freeing. In other words, she'll be free upon my death. Or well, you're not allowed to free a part of a slave. That can only happen if your partner's in a slave, so that doesn't come into it. But another one might be whether he says, right, no, she's going to do the chores and I'm not having anything to do with her, and then for 4 years he doesn't have anything to do with her. Then that's considered to be similar to having made her haram for himself. And there are lots of various ways that a man can do it. He could give her permission to marry somebody else, in which case she becomes haram for him, and so on and so on. Mimma tuharramu bihi, other sorts of things that make her haram for himself. So, and it would again also apply if he's married to a woman and then he buys her sister. He's not allowed to have sexual intercourse with that sister while he's married to one of them. That's the same thing, you know, whether it's both of them being full slaves or one of them being a wife and one of them being a slave, it's forbidden. وَمَنْ وَطَأَ أُمَّةً بِمِلْكٍ. This is something I thought we mentioned a little bit as well. If you own a slave woman and you have sexual intercourse with her, and then you meet her mother or you meet her daughter, those women are haram for you. Just in the same way as if you marry a woman, her mother and her daughter are haram for you forever, not temporarily, forever. So the moment you've had sexual intercourse with a woman, he mentions here, even if she's somebody you're not allowed to have sexual intercourse with, I mean, in other words, a slave woman who is a Zoroastrian, which is completely forbidden, but they wouldn't give you the level of the had punishment for that, but still it's forbidden. Her mother would then be, even if her mother was a Muslim, would be haram for you forever, and her daughter would be haram for you forever. So he says here, Lam tahillu lahu ummuha, her mother is not halal for him, nor her bintuha, nor her daughter. Wa tuharramu ala, and she becomes haram for his own father, grandfather, great-grandfather. That's why he says aba. The same applies to the other, by the way. Her mother, her grandmother, her great-grandmother, they're all haram for you, or her daughter, her granddaughter, her great-granddaughter are all haram for you. The same here, her father and anybody going up, and her son, your father and anybody going up, he cannot be with her, and your sons and anybody going down cannot be with her the moment you've had sexual intercourse with her. So he says here, كَالتَّحْرِيمِ النِّكَاح, the same way as they become haram through nikah. And this is forever haram. This is not like when there's two sisters, if one of them becomes haram for you, the other one can become halal for you. This is not the same. The moment you've had intercourse with a woman, you can never have sexual intercourse or marry her mother, ever, or her daughter. وَالطَّلَاقُ بِيَدِ الْعَبْدِ دُونَ السَّيِّدِ. So this is another thing that we don't really have to deal with now, but slaves were considered property, but that did not mean that they had absolutely no sovereignty over their own affairs. Now, the Messenger of Allah ﷺ placed divorce in the hands of the husband, and nobody else can take that from the husband, or unless the husband has done something that has caused the wife to have to go elsewhere to seek somebody to go over his head. But it belongs to the husband. And he says, even if that husband is a slave. So if I own a slave and I give permission to my slave to get married, and then I decide, oh, this marriage is taking too much time away from my slave. So I say, no, you're divorced from her. I can't have you married to this woman. You're not giving me the level of service that you did before. That's not allowed. Once you've given permission for him to marry her, that's it. The only one who can now decide to stop being married to her is him. Unless he marries without your permission. If he marries without your permission, then you can say, no, that's not allowed. Because for a slave, when it comes for a slave buying and selling, and his buying and selling counting, or a slave being married, all of his transactions, he has to get the permission of his owner first. وَلَا طَلَاقَ لِصَبِيٍّ. Well, you mentioned before also that sometimes they would marry people together, their children, when they were still children. So you would have a prepubescent or a child married to a child. Sometimes a child will be married to an adult. A male child will be married to an adult on occasion. So in that particular case, while the sexual relationship could not start, there would still be the issue of whether this male child can get himself out of that marriage or not. And he says, no. A child has no right to divorce. Because what does divorce do? Divorce makes something that was halal for you, haram for you. And that is not something that is permitted for somebody who is mukallaf, غير mukallaf, who is not legally responsible. Because they are not legally accountable for their actions. The qalam is lifted, as the Rasul ﷺ mentioned, for children. And this obviously is like a child or somebody who is majnoon, somebody who is mad. Again, in a couple of words, what they mentioned, came up last week, somebody who is mukrah, somebody who has been coerced by somebody else. So if I come and with a gun and put it to somebody's head and tell him, right, divorce her or I'm going to shoot you. So he says, all right, she's divorced. Then I go away. Not legally binding. Doesn't count. Or somebody who is drunk by something which is halal. In other words, he did it by mistake. Or he drank some milk, and the milk. I was reading the other day that, the durian fruit, sometimes that can get very alcoholic inside, which is why it has this pungent smell. You eat your durian and suddenly you're completely plastered, and then you tell your wife you're divorced. That wouldn't count either. But if you went out on the tiles and had a few beers, knowing what you were doing, and then you were completely drunk, and then you went home and told your wife you're divorced, that would count. There's an exception to this, by the way. He says here that a child has no right to divorce. If a child is married to a woman and his guardian sees that it's in the best interest of that child not to be married to that woman anymore, then yes, he can issue a divorce, but the child himself can't. But if I come to you, I'm married, and I come to you and you're only a child, and I say, look, I hand the right of divorce over to you. Whatever decision you make about my wife is binding on me. Be a bit of a daft thing to do. Or if you went to somebody who's mad and gave that to them, or whatever, or even a non-Muslim. Because another one who is divorced doesn't count as a non-Muslim. You wonder where the scenario comes in, because you know that a non-Muslim when somebody leaves Islam, that's a divorce. We mentioned that before. But that means that he can't then say, oh, and I divorce you a second time and I divorce you a third time, because he's no longer allowed to do it. But here, if I say to a child or to a kafir, a non-Muslim, look, the decision about my marriage is in your hands. If you want to divorce, divorce. If you don't, don't. And he says she's divorced, that's binding, even though it's a child or a non-Muslim making that decision. You're the idiot for placing that in that guy's hands. So that's called tawkil. When you place the decision in somebody else's hand, you make them your agent. There are two other types of ways of doing that. You can do that to your wife as well. You can tell your wife, I placed the decision in your hands as my wakil. But when you do that, you can take it back from her. You can say, okay, no, I changed my mind. I'm not giving you that right. But there are two things that you cannot take back when it comes to that particular type of thing. That's called tamlik and takhyir. So tamlik is when you place your wife's affair in her own hands. So your affair is in your own hands. And they usually use the word umallikuki. I place the sort of ownership of your own affair in your hands. And you can't take that back once it's given, although it does have a time limit, which is, I mean, there were some of the early positions was it didn't have this time limit, but he mentions here that the time limit is if you're in a sitting and you give it to her, then so long as you're still in that sitting, she can take it and use it. But as soon as you part ways from that, unless you're just immediately giving it to her, then charging off so she hasn't got a chance to use it, then she has until the end of that sitting to use this particular thing. And what the consequences of this is a triple divorce, unless the husband says, no, I didn't mean to give her it's only a triple divorce. Basically what happens is she said, you have the right of your own affair, and she says, okay, I divorce you 3 times. Yeah. If she says that, then he can turn around and say with tamlik, no, I was only giving her the right over 1 divorce. And then he has to swear an oath that that's what he meant. Yeah. But if she turns around and says 3, it's not binding on him, because as it mentions here, the second, he'll mention here in a second. And the second one is called takhyir, and that's when you give her the choice, the khiyar, between remaining with you or divorcing you. Basically, she's completely out of your isma. She's no longer connected to you at all, or she remains connected to you. It's a much more final, in a sense. And so for that reason, Imam Malik considered this one, if you say the choice of this matter is yours, to mean 3 if she chooses it herself. Completely gone. So there's one difference between them. So tamlik and takhyir are the same if the husband doesn't say anything. If she says 3 for both of them, but takhyir, he can't take it back. He can't say no, I only meant to give her a choice about 1. He's not allowed to do that. So that's the difference, although they're very similar. So he says here, wal mumallakatu wal mukhayyaratu, the woman who has been given a tamlik and the woman who's been given a takhyir. And both these divorces, even the single one, are ba'in, by the way. They are irrevocable. He can't just take her back. They have the right, they must make their choice about this matter that it's been placed in their hands, ma damata fil majlis, so long as they are still in the sitting in which that offer was made to them. Walahu an yunakir al-mumallaka, the husband has the right to contradict or counter the claim, what the mumallaka said, or void some of what she says. Khasa, only her, only the mumallaka, not the mukhayyara. Fima fawqa al-wahida, for any divorces that she tries to say she is divorcing him more than 1. So as I said, if she says 3, he has the right to say no, I was only giving her the right over 1. Or if she says 2, he says, I was only giving her the right for 1. Or if she says 3, he says, I was only giving her the right over 2. It's left up to him. وَلَيْسَ لَهَا فِي التَّخْيِيرِ أَن تَقْضِي إِلَّا بِثَلَاثٍ. But when it comes to takhyir, she only has the right to make a decision about 3 and nothing else. So as soon as she chooses herself and chooses to be separated from him, the only way they can get back together is if she marries another man and consummates the marriage with that other man before they can ever get back together. So it's quite a serious one, takhir. ثم لا نكرة له فيها, and he cannot counter what she says by saying he only meant one. وكل حالف, so there's a couple more we'll be able to get through, inshallah. This is an oath. So I think we mentioned something about oaths before. I don't know if people remember. A few months ago, we talked about oaths, and there are things that happen to you when you break oaths, and different types of oaths that a person can make. One particular type of oath that people used to make was to swear that they would not have sexual intercourse with their wife for a certain period of time or other. This was something that was done, and it's called ila. It's mentioned in the لِلَّذِينَ يُولُونَ مِن نِسَائِهِمْ تَرَبُّصُ أَرْبَعَةِ أَشْهُرٍ فَإِنْ فَاءُوا فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ غَفُورٌ رَحِيمٌ. So it mentions ila in the Quran, and this is a particular oath where you swear that you are going to not sleep with your wife for a period of time that's 4 months or longer. That's how the oath. So as I say, I swear that I'm not going to have sexual intercourse with my wife for a year, for example. If you said something like that, then that's considered to be ila the moment you make that oath. So he says here, وَكُلُّ حَالِفٍ عَلَى تَرْكِ الْوَطْءِ, every husband who makes an oath to not have sexual intercourse for أَكْثَرَ مِنْ أَرْبَعَةِ أَشْهُرٍ, for longer than 4 months, he is mulin. He is somebody who is considered to have taken an oath of ila. وَلَا يَقَعُ عَلَيْهِ الطَّلَاقِ. This is not automatic divorce. Obviously, the meaning of marriage is sexual intercourse. So if you're making oaths like that, it is contrary to what marriage is. But he says here, this is not automatic divorce. إِلَّا بَعْدَ أَجَلِ الْإِيلَاءِ. So basically, when the husband makes this oath, the wife takes the matter to the qadi again and says, look, my husband's sworn that he's going to not sleep with me for the next 12 months. Yeah, any period of time longer than 4 months. So when the qadi hears that, then he basically summons the guy and says, look, take that back. He says, no, all right. So then the qadi sets a period of time now of 4 years. So basically the qadi tells him to break his oath. So I mean, it's not 4 years, 4 months. So basically, he basically now sets him a limit. So within these 4 months, you better take her back, because you're not allowed to do it for longer than 4 months. So there's 4 months in the oath, and now 4 months as the period of time that's ruled on by the qadi before he makes a decision about divorce. So he says, وَلَا يَقَعُ عَلَيْهِ الطَّلَاقِ إِلَّا بَعْدَ أَجَلِ الْإِلَاءِ, except when the period of time of ila, which is the 4 months, has passed. وَهُوَ أَرْبَعَةُ أَشْهُرٍ لِلْحُرِّ, it's 4 months for the free man. وَشَهْرَانِ لِلْعَبْدِ, or 2 months for a slave. So a slave who's married gets only 2 months if he makes this oath. حَتَّى يُوقِفَهُ السُّلْطَانِ. So the divorce doesn't happen even after that 4 months ends, until the qadi puts him on the spot. So basically, the qadi at the end of this 4 months says, all right then, your time is up. What's your choice? Are you going to take her back, which means have sexual intercourse with her? Or am I going to divorce her? And he might give him even a little bit more time, up to, if he thinks that there is a chance. But, that's it. So then basically it would only be a short period of time, and then he would then say, okay, then you have to divorce her. If the guy says, no, I'm not going to divorce her, and I'm not going to sleep with her, then the qadi says, all right, then I'm going to divorce her over your head. Basically, that's the situation here. If he takes her back, which means having sexual intercourse with her, then basically he has to pay the kafara for breaking an oath, because he swore an oath, but still has to do that. It's an obligation on him if he wants his marriage to survive, basically. If he claims he did, and she says, no, he didn't, again, it comes into swearing of an oath. His word is taken, and he has to swear an oath. وَمَنْ تَظَاهَرَ مِنْ إِمْرَأَتِهِ. So that's called ila. Another one that's mentioned in the Quran in the beginning of Surah Al-Mujadalah, is dhihar. And this was another type of practice that was practiced by the Arabs, almost like an oath, but not quite. It was basically when somebody compares his wife to somebody who is haram for him. Now, we mentioned before that if you say to your wife, you are haram for me, that is a divorce. And it's a complete divorce. But if you say it in a different way, if you say, this used to be a divorce before Islam, but they made this easier for people. But there are consequences, because you should not be saying things like this. If you say, you are like my mom to me, or you are like my sister to me, or you are like the back of my mum to me, or whatever it is. Basically, you're indicating that she's haram for you, but it's not a direct thing of haram. So in the beginning, it gave people a way out of this. But they had, so he mentions the rulings of this here. Because it's just something so repugnant for a person to say. But again, you don't want to be dissolving a marriage, and they didn't directly say haram here. So he says here, وَمَنْ تَظَاهَرَ مِنْ إِمْرَأَتِهِ, the person who says this to his wife, فَلَا يَطَأُهَا, he's not allowed to have sexual intercourse with his wife, حَتَّى يُكَفِّرْ, until he pays a kafara for what he said. He can't just say this to her and then say, oh, I take it back. It's a serious thing. Again, we're not saying it's going to be a divorce, but we're saying it's a serious thing. So he can't just take her back. He has to pay a pretty strong kafara. So he says here, this kafara involves بِعِتْقِ رَقَبَةٍ مُؤْمِنَةٍ. Either he frees a believing slave, salima min al-uyub, a slave that is a believer, a Muslim, and also has no defects whatsoever. لَيْسَ فِيهَا shirk, has no this it's not shirk in the sense of associating partners. It means that this slave is wholly owned by him. He has to buy the slave himself, or has to be owned by him himself, and he frees her. He can't just have free his share of a slave. It has to be a full slave. لا طرف من حرية, and this slave cannot have any part of being free already. So they can't be a slave that's already paying a kitaba, paying her own freedom in installments, or a slave that's an walad, who's going to be free when he dies because she's given birth to his child, and say, no, you're free now. No. It has to be a fully owned slave with no aspect of free. So that's the first one. فَإِن لَمْ يَجِدْ, if he cannot find this. In other words, this is now an order of priority. When it comes to kafarat, it's not always an order of priority. Sometimes you can choose whichever one you want to do. It could be fasting, it could be feeding, it could be freeing a slave. Here he says, no. The most expensive one, in a sense, here is the one you have to do first, because it's the biggest financial blow to you for this horrible thing that you've said. So if you can't find the means to do this, or there's no slaves, you can't find a slave to free. فَإِن لَمْ يَجِدْ صَامَ شَهْرَيْنِ مُتَتَابِعَيْنِ, you have to fast 2 consecutive months. فَإِن لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ, if you do not have the physical capacity to fast 2 consecutive months. Obviously, with a woman, this is obviously only for men, but just to clarify this, when a woman fasts 2 consecutive months, obviously she has to take out the periods of time when she's having her menstrual periods, and then just immediately start when the menstrual period is finished on the other side. Just to make that point while we're talking about this. If he doesn't have the ability to do that, then أطعم 60 مسكينا مدين لكل مسكين. He has to feed 60 poor people, 2 muds for every miskin. So again, here it has to be 60 separate people, 2 muds for everyone. You can't give 120 muds to one person, or 4 muds to 30 people. It has to be 60 people. So it might be difficult for you to find 60 people. So that would be a challenge in itself, to find 60 poor people, but that's what you have to do. وَلَا يَطَعُهَا فِي لَيْلٍ أَوْ نَهَارٍ حَتَّى تَنْقَضِيَ الْكَفَارَةِ. You're not allowed to have sexual intercourse with her during the day or the night until that kafara is completed, whether it's the feeding of 60 people or the freeing of the slave or the 2 months. فَإِن فَعَلَ ذَلِكَ فَلْيَتُوبْ إِلَى اللَّهِ. If you do have sexual intercourse with her, you should make tawbah to Allah Azza wa Jal. فَإِن كَانَ وَطْءُهُ بَعْدَ أَنْ فَعَلَ بَعْدَ الْكَفَّارَةِ. If he has sexual intercourse with her after she has completed some of the after he has completed some of the kafara, but not the whole of the kafara, so he's fasted 1 consecutive month and he has sexual intercourse with her, or he's fed 30 people and then he has sexual intercourse with her. بِإِطْعَامٍ أَوْ صَوْمٍ, whether it's feeding or fasting, فَلْيَبْتَدِئُهَا, he has to start again. So 59 days. If it's 2 months of 30 days and then he does that, start right at the beginning again. وَلَا بَأْسَ بِعِتْقِ الْأَعْوَرِ. So he mentions here there, we say healthy, but he says there are some things that are exempt from this thing. He says by healthy, it doesn't mean there's no harm in freeing a slave that has got one eye not working. Fi dhihar, when it comes to this kafara for dhihar. Well, what is zina, or even a slave that who was born out of wedlock. وَيُجْزِئُ الصَّغِيرُ, but it is permitted to free a child, a slave child. When you say free a believing slave, even though children are not held accountable for their actions. وَمَنْ صَلَّى وَصَامَ أَحَبُّ إِلَيْنَا. But if the person that you free is somebody who prays and fasts, in other words, an adult who has to pray and fast, we prefer that. So we'll finish there, inshallah. Next time we're going to go on to li'an, which is again in the Quran, beginning of Surah Nur, which is accusations of infidelity, and a couple of other things relating to this, and then we will be finished with this chapter, inshallah. Any questions? No? بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد عبدك ورسولك النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم.